So welcome back to my channel. Today we are going to continue our discussion on laces. For today's video, we're actually going to discuss different lace trims and the different ways they can be used to make your project a little bit more fun. So let's look down at the table. So we have a variety of different laces. Now I have a whole lot more laces than this. If you actually look here, these are all of the new laces that I got. I'm not going to go through all of those. I picked out a handful here just so we can kind of take a little look at what we've got going on. So the ones in the middle are really nice. One thing I want to point out is that there is kind of like a seam going down the middle. So we have a design that is making it very clear that this could actually become two different laces. So you can actually use these laces that have this piece going down the middle as a whole piece or as two separate pieces. Now this one I actually started cutting already. So you can see that you can actually turn this into two scalloped laces. Now what I would do is if you're gonna do something like this, the seam on here is kind of big. It's all mesh, so it's not gonna fray. So if you're going to come in, I probably should have my glasses on while I'm doing this because I can't quite see the edge. Those ones don't seem to be sharp enough. And these scissors will probably chop right through the fabric. Anyways, I will just kind of explain. So what I would do is I would kind of cut along the one edge, and then you can go back like here and clean it up. So kind of clean up that little mesh that's in there. And that's just depending on how you're going to be using it. If you're going to use this kind of at the bottom, you can use this at the bottom or this at the bottom of a garment. But I just wanted to show you that that's what you can do with those. You just cut them apart and you have two laces. So two for the price of one. Now I want to show you these up here. So now these ones have kind of this cool little hole detail. And this one also has a hole detail, just a little bit different though. And I want to show you, this is how you can actually use them. So you can actually put ribbon or anything that's kind of decorative down the middle to make a pretty detail on your garment. Now I have seen some people that will use this lace as kind of a gathering detail. So they'll actually sew this onto the garment and then use this to gather it so the lace itself is pulling the fabric. I'm not sure how, I don't think I would do that necessarily just because the lace is going to get worn a little bit more. But if you have a detail that you do want to stretch the lace, this is kind of a nice way to do it. You can also put it through there and then stitch it down. You can kind of play around, but it gives you a lot of options. Same thing with this little one. Kind of hard to see. I'll put it closer to the camera. So you can see that this little piece of soutache is going between every single little hole. So this you can play around with different colors, contrasting. You can again then do kind of gathering details. So let's say you want to just do something gathered. I don't know. The possibilities are endless. So in order to do those, well, here, let's take this one out and let's put it back in there. You will need a loop turner. You should have several of these in your sewing supplies because once you set them down, you can never find them. So I think I found two. I had only seen one more recently, but I have 6 of them in here. So what you're going to do is with that little hook thing, you're going to go in and out on the different ones, going back and forth, or whichever pattern you want to do. So you can take that and then you can hook it, that's the side I hooked last time. You want to hook it in the soutache, not right on the edge because it'll unravel like that just did. So you got to get it in there, kind of in the hook, and then you kind of close the little lever that's there, and then you want to pull it through. And you want to keep it taut, so kind of keep your, between the soutache or the ribbon and your hook, you want to keep it taut, otherwise it could come apart in the middle. And that's how you can do that. So what I would actually do is, if you're going to be using this type of trim, I would actually put this ribbon or lace detail on the garment first and then sew it on. I think it'll make it a little bit easier, but of course you can always do it later. It just might be a little bit harder to get around some areas. Okay, so that's how you do that. Now I want to show, I'm going to go over to the machine in just a minute, how to sew a trim down. Now it's easy. You can even, here's a sample that I did. And what I ended up doing is I ended up doing a straight stitch on here and on here. Because it doesn't, well, this fabric stretches, but you know, this lace doesn't really. You kind of want to not put it on something that's going to stretch, because even though this has a little bit of a stretch to it, this is not considered a stretch lace. This is just kind of, as you can see, it makes everything just a little bit narrower. So you can sew this onto, you know, a satin or anything that you really probably don't have any stretch on. Otherwise, it could cause some puckering on it. So I did a straight stitch along this end, and then I also did a second straight stitch at the beginning of the scallops. So you have these little scallops, and then we can have just a little bit of detail. You can also use this so it's like on the edge of a garment. So you can have the little scallops kind of going around down off of the edge. But this way, we don't have to actually go in and sew around that. You can if you want. And you know, I did a video a couple weeks ago where we actually did kind of a cutaway area behind it. And you can certainly do that with something like this too, but you would want to, instead of straight stitching, you want to zigzag that edge as tight as possible and then zigzag around the little scallops, and then you can cut away the fabric that's back in here. But I'm not going to do that in today's demo. I'm just going to actually just stitch it down just as is. Now, these are just some other pieces of lace. Now, you may end up coming to a point where, like, you know what, I really wish I had a 4 to 5 inch piece of lace. Well, this one's 2 inches, this one's 2.5. So how, you know, I don't have anything else and I don't really want to spend more money. Well, you can actually have a little bit of fun with your laces and piece them together. These are 3 separate laces that I have attached. Now, when I sewed them together, they were a little bit wrinkled, but I just took it to the iron and it completely flattened them out. So I have just kind of, you know, a little bit of lace trim on that side. So you can actually create your own lace fabric by just piecing it together. So for this one, I think I did a straight stitch. It's kind of hard to see because I did I think I did a straight stitch on those ones. I might have done a zigzag on this one. I can't quite see because I stitched in black. But you can really use almost any stitch you want. It depends on kind of, you know, if it's a stretch fabric that you're piecing together, you want to do zigzag. But if it's a straight non-stretch fabric, you can actually just do a straight stitch. So now I have a couple different pieces here because what I wanted to do is I wanted to increase one by doing something like that, where I kind of have a little scallop on the top, which gives a little extra detail. But then I also want to play around with piecing together on the straight. Now you can kind of do this where you would just kind of zigzag the 2 edges together, and this may end up puckering because it's a little bit thinner to be doing that. So like, you can always attach different trims together, but when you're working with something this thin, you can zigzag, but do not backstitch at either end, so you can actually kind of steam it and loosen that out. So it's kind of doing just the, what do you call it? You butt the edges together and stitch them together. This one we're actually going to overlap and stitch one on top of the other. And this is kind of the end result. So I'm going to go over to the machine and I will see you there shortly. So this lace, I'm just going to attach on here with a straight stitch. You can certainly do a zigzag, but if you're just going to be sewing a flat piece onto another flat piece that is not going to have any curves to it, then you're fine just doing a straight. So I'm going to start doing the straight side because of course that's the easiest. And I want to try and get fairly close to the edge, but also be aware that the machine itself or the foot can start moving this around. So if we want, we could actually take and we can glue it down if we'd like. I'm going to grab a couple pins just to kind of help keep it in position. And you can use that glue stick like I used in the other video. It's a wash away, so it works just fine. And so I would not do any back stitches on this in case you need to steam it. Leave yourself a pretty big long tail at both ends. So that way, if you do need to loosen your threads after you've sewn it, it's easy to do. Okay, and I've got just a straight stitch. Just kind of letting it go to its path. Okay, there we go. And one stitch down. Little tail there. Now, you can certainly stitch around each of these scallops, but I don't think I need to. You know, you can always stitch it so you can have that little bit of edge kind of flip up. You could even just leave it so that's the only thing that's stitched down, but I'm going to just stitch it right across, kind of at the top of where each of these scallops hit. So I'm going to line that up, keeping my long tails. All good. We can check to make sure there's no puckers. It doesn't seem to be puckering on both sides. Now there's plenty of different ways to attach this, and I'm sure you'll find 100 different videos on little techniques to do, but you do what you're comfortable doing and the use for the project, so we don't have to make it all fancy. Okay, so now this is one. I'm going to do this with black thread on white because I felt it would be a little bit easier. So we can line this up so we have some overlap on here. So we have some detail kind of scalloping, or if you want, we could actually do it this way. That way might be a little bit easier. And what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to flip it over so I'm sewing on the straight, so I can see that straight edge. So it's easier for me to kind of line them up. So I'm going to try and line them, just put a couple pins, making sure that the kind of straight little scallops are hitting at the same point on the other lace. Otherwise, once it starts moving around, it could look a little wonky. And my cat is yelling, so you may hear her in the background. But we have the microphone pointed away from her, so hopefully you won't hear her. Okay, and so for this one, I'm just going to sew a straight on close to the edge of this straight line, so maybe about 1/8 of an inch to 1/4 of an inch away, so that's like 3 to 6 millimeters away. And just straight old stitches. And you can also kind of make sure that it stays fairly flat as you're going. It's just harder to see through the scallops. It's easier to see on the straight side. Okay, and you can see mine has it has puckered a little bit. So what we can do is we can take and kind of use our nail, or when we go to the iron, we can just steam it. But anytime you're working on something thin, it's always going to try and pull it. You could play around with the tension on your machine. I think I got a lot of it out. There's still a little bit there. So I'd probably take this over to the iron after that. And you can see what we have the room. I can feel the thread moving down. So that area over here is a little bit flatter. So that's just piecing 2 pieces together. Okay, now this is another one we're going to try and do by butting the edges together. And as my husband told me that in in carpentry? Welding, it's a butt joint. There are edge joining feet as well. So I want to get a fairly wide zigzag on here. So let me get that going. And I'm going to do a slightly smaller stitch. Otherwise, it's not going to do a whole lot on here. Okay. So I got that side. So the seam of the two where they butt together should be right in the middle of the foot, providing your zigzag goes right there in the middle. Oh, then I probably just a little bit too small, so we can make it a little bit bigger. That's probably good. Okay. And I'm having a whole lot of skip stitches. I've actually been having issues with these, the needles on this machine. They stopped making the stretch needle, and yep, it's not stitching at all. So much for that one. But that's how you would do it if you actually have needles that will sew through your fabric. So you probably need kind of a finer point, or I don't think this would be a ball point. I think this would be a fine point. But you would just have to play around with your stitches. So that was a fail, but you get the idea. Anyways, that's it for my little sewing demos. I hope you enjoyed this and got a little something out of it. Thanks for watching.